I'm Robin Lane, psychologist and host of How We Love. On this episode, my guest, Craig Braun, returns to share his extraordinary journey from the dazzling heights of rock and roll, surrounded by sex, drugs, and fame, to a devastating crash and ultimately a powerful resurrection. His is a story of reinvention, redemption, and the enduring force of creativity. Welcome back, Craig Braun.
It's good to be with you, my dear.
So, Craig, let me go back a little bit because you told us last time of the agonizing story of the difficulties that you had with the IRS, but what you didn't explain was how you got a tax evasion problem to begin with.
Okay. I went into my own business in the mid-60s, and I had an office between 5th and Madison on 53rd Street, a small office with two offices. And I hired someone who was recommended to me by a friend of mine, and it was his ex-wife. And what the hell was her name? Anyway, she's key in this. Oh, Marilyn Wallace was her name, and she worked for me. I had a one-girl office. She was my right arm, and after about 4 months, all the excuses of coming late or not coming at all, that her kid was sick and so forth, I had to let her go. And what happened was I hired somebody else, and then the husband, who had been divorced to her, about 6 months later, he called me and he said, "I have to warn you, Craig." I said, "Well, what is that?" He said, "My wife went to your former employer, and the two of them filed a case or notified the IRS that you were a tax evader, and they're conducting an investigation. So I'm telling you this, so even though you'll have a gray cloud over your head, at least you'll know what's coming." And I said, "Why would she do that?" And he said, "Well, the thing that you didn't know is that my ex-wife became obsessed with you. She hadn't worked in a number of years. You know, she was taking care of our boy. And then when she met you, she fell obsessively in love with you." I said, "Come on, I didn't see any of that. So that's a false excuse." He said, "No, it's the truth. She told me she was obsessed with you, but she was afraid of you, so she didn't say anything. But when you fired her, it was a scorn beyond all the pain that she could imagine, and she wanted, revenge. So she went to the guy you used to work for, and the two of them went down there to the IRS, and they get, I think, 5 or 10% of whatever's recovered from you." And I said, "This is like a fucking movie, man." And he said, I'm really sorry." He said, "Well, I'm divorced from her, and that's one of the reasons why." So he said, "Just be aware of that." So I don't know, 6 months later, I started getting these notices from the IRS that they wanted to do, extensive audits. And then I got served with a stack of papers, and the front of it said, on the first page, "United States of America versus Craig Braun." And then it goes on and on and on and talks about the indictments or possible indictments and so forth. So I was put on notice that I was under the gun, as they say. And I called my buddy Marshall Chess and I said, "Do you know a great tax lawyer? Because I got a federal fight on my hands." And he said, "Yeah, I'll send a guy to you." And I said, "Great." So this lawyer arrives and I tell him what's going on. And he says to me, "It's a tough one. It's a lot of work. And we have to do a lot of detective work too to prepare. And so before I leave today, have your bookkeeper. At that time, I was down on 56 East 53rd Street, and I had 2 floors in the building, and I had about, I don't know, 16 people, 20 people working for me, and give me a check for 10,000. And I said, wow, we just met for 20 minutes and it's 10,000. He said, well, these things are expensive. And so I shook hands with him and I said, we'll get it off to you. And then when he left, oh, he said, oh, thank God you're not talking to Boris Kostelanetz right now. I said, who's he? Well, he's the most important tax lawyer for your kind of case. He'd be asking you for $25,000 or $50,000. Now we're talking about the 70s. So in today's money, it's probably $75,000 or $100,000, I would say. So as soon as he left my office, I told my assistant, get Boris Kostelanetz on the phone for me. So she did. And because I wanted to sleep, I thought with this kind of heaviness that they're predicting and what the ex-husband predicted, I'm going to be living with a gray cloud, not over my head, but around my shoulder.
Wait a minute. Let me ask you a thing. You're telling me that you were innocent?
I was innocent. I was indicted finally on 2 counts. I was innocent of one and guilty on the other.
So you had made a mess for yourself.
I had made a what?
A mess for yourself.
I guess so. You could call it that. It's worse than a mess. It's a very heavy thing. As soon as I saw the United States of America versus Craig Braun, I thought, holy fuck. I mean, that's such a heavy case, that it frightened the hell out of me. And, I didn't want to do any time in the Gray Hotel. So, I wanted to get the best representation to get me off of this thing. And so he did want a big advance. I think it was 30 grand. He was the attorney general under Lyndon Johnson, or the office head of the OMB, the budget thing. The guy was heavy and he was really connected. And his brother was a famous orchestra guy named Andre Kostelanetz. You're old.
I remember him. You've told us a lot of this. I just wanted to know how you got into the mess in the first place.
So I got in because of this secretary that fell in love with me, so he says.
Yeah, but also because you didn't play by the rules 100%.
No, I never have played by the rule 100%. Do you think I lived a big life? Holding on to everything and trying to be the right guy? No, I took a lot of risks.
But let's move on from there to your love affairs.
My love affairs. Well, there were many.
Yeah, did you ever get any of them really right? I mean, what is the longest love affair you've had?
The longest what?
What is the longest love affair that you have had? Have you had any that has lasted a decade?
Well, the truth known, I'm still in love. I still love DVF.
Diane von Furstenberg.
She was the big love, I would say, of my life. And there are a couple right under her, but they're a distant 2 and 3. But
and how long did that last, Craig?
Well, it was one period in the 70s of probably a couple of years, a year and a half, and then another in the 90s. We met at a screening of, what was it, You've Got Mail, that Tom Hanks and Meg Ryan movie. It was a select premiere, and the woman I was with at the time was second in command at Warner Brothers, and so she arranged all the seating for this because it was a Warner Brothers film. So we walk in and she knows I have to sit on the aisle, and I get about 25 steps into the theater and I hear Craig, and I turn to my right and there's Barry Diller and DVF sitting there, and she goes, oh my God, I haven't seen you and I bought a house exactly like yours on West 12th Street. And she gets out, starts hugging me in the aisle. And it had been, I don't know, a dozen years, maybe 15 years.
Well, why did it break up in the first place?
Oh, God. That's not that's not easy to answer because in the first place, the 70s, it was whack-a-mole. You could
I
be
mean,
with,
because of drugs.
no, not because of drugs. She hung around with a lot of drugs. Everyone in the fashion business was doing cocaine. It was very
So why
popular.
did it
You
make
were
it simple?
probably too
It's a
young,
simple,
but no.
Craig, it's a simple question. Why did it break up?
I think from my point of view, she wanted to restart her business. She went broke with the wrap dress, and then she signed up with a lot of licensees, like the Pierre Cardin fiasco, and Barry or somebody connected her with QVC, and she went down there to visit, and she saw that women who sell perfume and all that stuff on QVC, like it's $1 million a day. And so they offered her a deal there, and they would make everything in China, and she didn't even have to design. All she had to do was approve these things, and choose some fabrics. And she would go down there once a week. She'd fly down in one of Barry's planes. And so she was with me at the time, and I said, all you're doing is shredding your brand. I said, I can help you restart this thing. First of all, we have to change that signature on your old stuff, the Diane signature. And so I'll do a new logo for you, and I'll create some ads for you, and we can rebirth a second generation wrap dress. And so she got turned on to this idea. She had been thinking about it. It's not all new to me, but when I told her I would help her, I think it pushed her further towards saying, okay, I'm going to do this. So I said, and the other thing you had to do is cancel all these licensing agreements for sunglasses and shitty shoulder bags and all that stuff. And so she did that, and she restarted her business, and she started to get very busy. Marvin, whatever his name at Bloomingdale's, was on her side. Everybody loved her, in the retail business. So women's wear was all over it. She would go to Neiman Marcus and all these places and set up departments and meet with the people there and motivate them and so forth. And so we started to be a little bit apart because I'm older than she is, and I was working for Time Warner, the Warner Music Group at the time, but I didn't have any plans to escalate my career in any way, shape, or form. I was just waiting to get out of there. And so I was going in a different trajectory. I was heading down and out, and she had renaissanced her life and her career. And so I didn't want to meet her at Bloomingdale's for another opening and stuff like that. I would tell her, listen, I'll be at the house. I'll meet you at the house later. Tell the security guard that whenever I come to open the door. And so that's how it went. So it started to dwindle and disconnect. And she was doing what she wanted to do. She had been, I guess, remotivated and excited by prospects because the welcome that she got from that world was very encouraging and successful immediately.
Let's go back to you. So with all your love affairs, did you ever get one right that actually lasted a decade?
No, I still have one today that's about 50 years old, but
50,
I'm no
you have
longer,
one today? You have
yeah, 50, maybe 50, 55 years. I saw her last night. I took her out for her birthday. Uh, she she was with me just sporadically because she had moved here as an executive in her 20s from AT&T LA, and they told her to get an apartment and they would pay for it. And I had gotten my house, so I was looking to sublet my co-op, and she showed up to see the apartment. And as soon as I saw her, she was unbelievably beautiful. And I was with this French woman at the time, and she had spent the night with me. So I said, she's something, huh? And she said, oh, very beautiful. And I said, yeah, she's going to get the apartment. So she took my apartment, and AT&T would send the checks, the monthly checks. So she called me 3 months later. She said, you haven't cashed any of the checks. The accounting department, that was when AT&T was a monopoly, they're saying that you're not cashing the checks, or I'm sending them to the wrong place. So she called me up, and I said, well, I don't cash them. I just put them in a desk drawer. So she says, they're bugging me. Can you please cash them? I said, nobody ever got a check like this from AT&T. We all send money to AT&T. So I want all these checks. I'm going to frame them, I get checks from AT&T.
Okay, but wait a minute. Okay, so this woman, you've had this on and off love affair for 50 years, but have you ever lived with one woman for 10 years?
No.
No.
I haven't lived with myself for 10 years. Well, anyway, but this woman, she then, I'll tell you a little vignette. She used to invite me to things. She said, I want to take you to a play called Find Your Way Home, an English play. I think you'll really enjoy it. So she took me there. And during the play, I'm glancing peripherally at her, and she's mouthing the words. So at the interval, I said, you've been here before. And more than once. She said, yeah, I've been here maybe 6 or 7 times already. And I said, for what? She said, I had this big crush on the guy who's in it. He was a gay guy in this play. It was really about a relationship with a man and a wife, and they were middle-aged, living in London, and her husband was going out at night, so she followed him to this other apartment, and she followed him, and she saw inside there was 2 men, and so she goes up to the apartment door, and it's open, and she goes to the apartment door on the first floor, and it's open, obviously, to let this husband of hers in. And she goes in, and her husband is on the sofa in a compromising position with this gay guy. So I said, well, who's your crush on? She said, the gay guy. I said, okay, what's his name? She said, he's kind of new. His name is Michael Moriarty. So she said, why don't you come backstage? I've met him a couple of times, and come backstage, and we'll meet him. So we met him, and I had a nice chat with him, and we became friends, I would say almost instantaneously. And he told me about he had a repertory group called Potter's Field, and he wanted to do some promotion with it. And he said, and I have, what's her name, Jean Kennedy, what's the one on Sutton Place? She lives about 50 steps from me. She's gone now. She's throwing a big party with a lot of money, people, but I need a really classy invitation and some graphics. And I said, I'll take care of it, man. So I started helping him with his Potter's Field repertory company. I had nothing to do with acting at that time, but we developed a relationship, and then he married Anne. He was married to a French ballet person. He married Anne, and they were together, I'm going to say 15, 18 years or something like that. And I didn't see her very much during that period of time. but then they got divorced. He had a mental breakdown. He left Law and Order. He was the first DA on Law and Order for about 8 years, I think. And then he was off and running, and she divorced him. And fast forward another 10, 15 years, I'm doing a guest star on a show called Cold Case at Warner Brothers. And John Finn, who's an actor, he's the lead actor, he came over to me. He said, this kid is that's the cameraman? And I said, no, I don't know him. He said, he's the son of Michael Moriarty. I said, no. I said, Michael's a great friend of mine. He was now living in Vancouver. So I said, I want to grab him, because I want to see somebody that he's connected to. So I grabbed him. I said, listen, I'm going back to New York to do the Scottish play, and I want to see Anne if they're not still married. And he said to me, they've been divorced for 7 years. So I said, okay, I'm going to go back. I'm going to get a hold of her. She's still at the same place on 58th and 7th. Yeah. Oh, yeah, 200 West. So I get back, and I call. I leave a message. He gave me the number. No answer back for 2 or 3 days. And I'm on Central Park South, just around the corner. So I go in and I get the concierge, the doorman. I say, give me a card or something. He gives me a card, and I wrote in big letters, call me, and then small signature, Craig. And I said, and give this to Anne Martin when she comes in. And so he did. And then I waited another 3 or 4 days, and finally I hear from her. She said, you scared me with that card. I couldn't call you from my home. I had to be sitting in my big office at Memorial Sloan Kettering to call you. I said, Matthew, who's your son-in-law, told me that you're available. And so I asked him for your details, and he gave them to me. So, I want to see you. And so she said, well, I'm at an office for MSK on 53rd and 3rd. I said, well, go to the City Corp Plaza tomorrow. Can you get out in the afternoon for a coffee? Yeah. So I go there in that plaza that they had inside the City Corp building. I'm sitting there. I see this. I don't have my glasses on, but I see this figure coming down the stairs towards my table. And I can picture her in silhouette. She hasn't gained, she's like you, she hasn't gained a pound, and she looks fantastic. So she sits down, and we chat, and then we start going out, and we're a couple, all of a sudden we're.
And how long did that last?
I would say 2.5 years, and then we broke up. It's probably more on me than her, and it wasn't for anyone else. I just, we had already had these different checkerboard chapters, and I didn't want to. I knew
Craig, you're a player. I know a player when I'm speaking to him, but let's move on from there.
A player?
Yeah, a player.
A player. Oh, a player. No,
I'm not. Like women. You like women. Okay.
Oh, I love women. And they became a drug of mine. And, first it was sex only. I was interested in sexual adventures. It was part of my addiction. I was addicted to that. I always needed things to make me feel not Craig, something different. And women served that purpose. And so anyway, then it's all about attraction and how good they are in bed and how beautiful they are, it was all about that kind of stuff.
Wait, let me stop you for a second. Let me ask you another question, because you've had a number of sons. Which of the women is the mother to your son, Nicholas Braun, who's one of the stars of Succession?
That is Betsy, Elizabeth Her name was Elizabeth Whiteman when I met her.
Were you married to her?
Yeah, we were married for about 6.5 years.
That was
I never got to 7. I know you're going to say the itch. No, 6.5 years, and then we broke up, and I moved from Westport back to the city, and she got an apartment in Southport, Connecticut, and I'd see the kids on weekends and sometimes during the week, but you know, I met her in a meeting of troubled people, and she was. It was interesting. It was on a Saturday night on 73rd and Madison. I walk into this meeting, a meeting, and everyone's already sat down, and the speakers started, and I walked over to the coffee table, and she's standing there, and she's taller than I am, and she's not wearing high heels. So I look at her, and she looked like if Princess Diane had a sister, this would be her. So I whispered to her, I said, "You look great." And she leaned over on my ear and said, "You smell great." I said, I'm going to see you after the meeting. She said, "Oh, great." And she was about 23, and I was 45, 24. And I was 45. And so I said, "Listen, give me your number." She said, "Well, I'm going away for 3 or 4 weeks to see my grandma in Florida. So my last name is Whiteman, and it's Elizabeth. If you want, you can give a call after 3 or 4 weeks." And so I called. I couldn't find her, and then I thought, could she have given me the wrong number? And so I see her at another meeting, and she said, I tried to reach you. There were 3 Elizabeth Whitehouses in the White Pages. And she said, "It's not White House, it's Whiteman. So you've been trying to get me in the wrong number." So I said, "Well, I don't want to go through this anymore. So you go out with me now after the meeting." And she did. And the rest is history. We wound up, together.
How long into the marriage was Nicholas born?
After the marriage started?
Yeah. How long was it?
I'll say a year and a half, 2 years.
Because rumor has it that you taught him how to act. Is that true?
Yeah, it's absolutely true.
Well, then let's
when he was very young, and he would come once in a while, he would come himself without his little brother, and he would see me reading plays, so working on scenes for this acting coach I was doing work with at Carnegie Hall. So he'd say, "Let me read that with you." I said, "No, this is David Mamet." He says, I could say fuck, Daddy." So I said, "Okay." So he kind of got infected. He was always asking me, "What's that exercise? A repetition exercise." I said, "You mean where you sit in front of another actor and you just observe them and comment on the other person?" He said, yeah, I'll do that with you." And so I saw his interest in acting, and mine was very high at the time because I had left Time Warner and I was committed to becoming, or no, not yet. I really wanted to become an actor.
Why? Why?
Well, I did a play when I was at this boys' school in Chicago called Our Town by Thornton Wilder.
Everybody did Our Town. Why did you want to be an actor?
I never forgot it. And I felt something when I went on stage in front of a big audience for the first time in my life. There was something electrical and maybe spiritual running through me because I felt this strangeness that I never felt before, and it was good. I loved the fear transfer to total excitement. And so, but I got married at 20 or 21, and I had a kid at 22, and so life took over. I had to bring home the bacon and the baby shoes and shit. So that dream dissipated and went away. And
When did it resurrect itself that you actually started to become an actor?
I would say in the 90s.
You were already sober by then.
I would say maybe in the mid 90s.
Craig, were you sober by then?
Oh, yeah, I was sober 20 years or something. 20 years, yeah. So otherwise, I wouldn't have had the courage, to do it if I was still using and drinking. So anyway, I went to this well-known Meisner coach there, and I took Nick a couple of times. And then, momentous evening, I said, I want you to come to this play by August Wilson. He's a black playwright, and it's a play called Jitney, about a taxi stand in Detroit, Michigan, but it's a fascinating story. I think you'll enjoy it. He was 9.
Wow, you took him to see that at 9? Oh my goodness.
9 years old. And I took him there, and then he at the end of the play, he was transfixed. He kept looking at this jitney that jutted out over the edge of the stage. And he says, Daddy, that's a real taxi place, isn't it? I said, is that what you saw? And he said, yeah. And he said, and I believed everything they did, everything they said. He said, I said, yeah, that's what you're supposed to feel if you're in the audience. You're supposed to feel that. He said, oh, Daddy, he was just nonplussed. He didn't know what to say or do. So I said, look, they're cleaning up now. There's nobody left in the theater. We got to go. And it was Second Stage Theater on 8th and 43rd. So I said, let's go. So we're walking down the stairs, and I'm holding his hand. And he tugs on my hand. He tugs hard on my hand. And he said, Daddy. I said, what is it, Nicky? He said, Daddy, I know what I want to do in my life. I said, really? And he said, yeah. And he turns back, looking up the stairs, and he points with his left hand and his finger, and he said, I want to do that. So he knew what his calling was at age 9. And there are people who are 49 and don't know what the fuck to do with their lives. So Nick, I got him in for a movie, a family movie where he was the second lead, and then I got him into Law and Order. I used my agent and my contacts, and all of a sudden he's working. But I said, you're not going to take off school. You can work in the summertime if you get a job. So he started getting jobs as a working actor, even when he was 10, 11, 12. He was offered a series in Hawaii by James Brooks, one of the most successful comedy producer-directors.
Yes, and he's a wonderful actor. And let's go back to you. So what made you start acting? The excitement?
The excitement, I didn't know much about acting, but my closest friend, when I was a marketing director for Le Moustacartier in America, I chose an ad agency, and the guy that they assigned as my account executive became friends with me. And then a few years later, he left the advertising world and became an actor. And I used to go and see him in church basements and, these little off Broadway places. And I thought at that time, because he was really a friend of mine at that point, I thought I'm supporting him. Now, looking back, what I was doing was riding on his coattails because he was doing what I had always wanted to do since I was 16.
Wow.
So I had done a documentary for a guy in Washington named Carpenter, and it was the National Teenage Drug and Alcohol Quiz. So I hosted it, and they brought me to a high school with a couple of thousand kids in New Jersey, and I talked to all four classes, and there was a Q&A, and they shot it like a soap opera with three cameras, and they put and then we talked to successful kids who got clean or clean and sober, and put it on the last half of the show. And he said, I'm going to syndicate it. And he called me a few months later. And then he said, I got into 195 markets. I said, how the hell did you do that? An independent piece, because the networks do document it. He said, listen, Craig, I told them to couple it with local programming. So if kids had problems, in their family with alcoholism, or they had a problem with smoking dope, right? They could call these. So it was all localized by all of these reach out groups in all of these markets. So it was an easy sell. So I'm coming to New York. I want to celebrate with you. I said, well, good. I have tickets, a lot of tickets for Madison Square Garden. Let's go to a basketball game and have some dinner. He said, okay, great. So in the middle of the basketball game at halftime, everyone leaves us to get beer and hot dogs and go to the pissoir. And I'm just sitting alone with him there, and he said, you're an interesting guy. I want to know something. I said, well, what is it? He said, I don't think you'd be working for a big corporation if you had your druthers. What would you like to be doing at this moment? And I said, well, I'd probably be a boxing announcer for HBO, because I'm better than the guys that do those fights on HBO. So he said, is that the truth? I said, no, you really want the truth? He said, yeah. I said, I'd be an actor. And he was nonplussed. He said, really?
And how much after that did you start?
Well, I'm going to tell you how I got there. So, and it's worthwhile, because I said, he said, well, why don't you try and do that? I said, no, I'm working. I got a wife. I got two kids. I got to support. So, and it's too late for me. I'm 53 years old or something. So I missed it. And he said, well, I don't know. He said, this is what you'd really be doing. He said, this could be the major regret. Why don't you take acting lessons? Even if you never get on the boards, if you never get in front of a camera, at least you'll know what this is about, acting. And by the way, I received many letters about you talking to those kids, because you didn't talk down to them. You talked like you were one of them. And a lot of parents wrote to me. And so I said, but that's not acting. That's just Craig telling his story. And so acting is a whole different prowess. So he said, well, listen, if you don't follow my advice here, my suggestion, I know your life. He said, you've done everything you wanted to do except this, and this is big. And if you don't follow my suggestion, this could be the major regret of your life when you go down for the count. He used that boxing phrase at the end, which really fucked with me. So that night I couldn't sleep. When I go down for the count, the major regret of my life. And so the next morning I called that guy that left advertising. I said, I'm in a lot of trouble, man. You got to join me today. You got to come for lunch. I'm at the Saatchi and Saatchi building. And he said, I'll meet you. And so he met me, and we had lunch together, and I told him what the guy said. And he said, the guy is absolutely right. You should start studying with the guy, and I'm going to send you to the guy that I started with up on the back of Carnegie Hall. So I said, really? Do you think I should? He said, yeah, absolutely. You should do it. You should do it. And I went there, and I knew it wasn't for me. There were 5 or 6 young people, 20 to 30-year-olds. And here I am, in my mid-50s, and they're waiting. I made a date to see them, after work, and I'm in a double-breasted suit and camel hair coat. And I'm thinking, I go in the men's room and I'm looking at myself and say, what the fuck are you doing here, Craig? You're ridiculous. Just open that door and walk out, get in the elevator. Something happened, and not a voice from God or anything, but something said, I made a deal with myself. Just stay for the interview, and then you never have to darken this hallway again. But I didn't want to cop out on myself because those two guys that were encouraging me, I didn't want to go back to them and say I chickened out, you know. So I finally got in there about an hour later, and I told him the story of that John Doman, you know, meeting John Doman. He said, I want you. I said, but I know I'm too old to start. You probably have all young students. He said, no, I don't. I have some people that are 40 years old, even a couple of people in their 50s. So I want you in my sessions, he says to me. And I walked out of there, and I have to tell you, I was on cloud nine. I live on 56th Street, so I walked home thinking, oh my God, I'm going to start studying acting. I'm going to work with this coach. It was like somebody opened paradise to me.
Wow.
You know, it was that kind of a hope and dream that you don't want to talk about it. You don't want to say anything to anybody for, you know, the ridiculousness of it, and that it could never happen. It was never going to happen for me.
Well, it has happened. I have seen you act, and you're an
Yeah,
extraordinary actor, but I want to move on to something else, which
yeah.
is
With who?
about your getting sober and what that was like and how you've managed to stay sober for so many years.
Well, I think I had to go through a cathartic revelation that I was killing myself a day at a time. At that time, I had lost everything, the houses, everything, except for this apartment. And I moved to California, and I was living with this buddy of mine he was from Chicago. That's where I met him. And he was a DA under, what was his name? Daley, Richard J. Daley.
Yeah.
And so he had to escape. There were people after him. You know, in those days, Chicago was, you couldn't tell the cops from the robbers in those days. So he moved to Santa Monica, and he said, come on, I got a house in Santa Monica, man. You can live with me there. So I said, okay, man, I'm coming. And it turns out that his law practice was defending drug dealers and drug smugglers. That was all he did.
You had told us that, and part of his
Okay. So anyway, yeah, so we wound up taking his sister to a meeting. He confiscated her jar of Quaaludes and gave me a couple of them. And he said, if I give you a couple of these, will you go to the meeting with her and me tonight? Because I don't want to go alone with her. And I said, okay, man. So, you know, I dropped the tablets, the quackers, we used to call them. I dropped to a couple of quackers, and we went to the meeting. And it was a revelation to me. And I denied any need for it. You know, I had everything under control. I was going every morning to the Security Pacific Bank to get enough drugs for the day. I was maintaining. So, but the bite, you know, everyone was surrounding me like I was a new fish in the pond, but I was attracted by an authenticity and a truth that I never heard from anyone's mouth before.
What do you mean?
People were telling their darkest, deepest, brutal secrets of what they've done to themselves, what a life as an alcoholic or an addict was like, and how much damage they did to their children and their wives and all. They were talking very openly, vulnerably about the crimes that they committed against people that they loved and who loved them. And I could not believe that level of honesty. I just couldn't believe it, but it turned out to be true. And so I was attracted by what they had. I saw their stories were a lot like mine, different details, but they had to come to a surrender where they hit their knees and they decided that they were powerless over their drugs of choice or their alcohol, and they got sober. And
Craig,
so
let me ask you something, because you were on practically at one point everything. How has it been to be sober all the time?
it's not easy.
Tell me.
It's not easy because good things come to me and painful things come to me and problems come to me. In fact, you see them clearly now because you're not wasted, so you have to face them head on. And by doing that, you build a thing called self-esteem within you. I can do this. Self-worth, it goes up slowly, gradually. But I really reached a plateau where I was still very obsessive, compulsive in my mind. I didn't act on it as much. But I realized that I had never gone inside of Craig, and that if I wanted what they had, I had to be willing to do that. I never wanted to look inside. I was so frightened of seeing nothing or seeing a terrible, that I'm really a terrible piece of shit. I had no love for myself. I didn't even think in those terms. I never said I love myself. And so I realized, I had lived a material life, as I've been talking to you about, a very internal life had nothing to do with my externals. And so I decided to venture in. And because when I started acting, there was the same admonition that you have to peel off all of these protective layers to do the work. And to stay sober, you have to do the same thing. So the two of them in tandem kept me on this search for the rigorous truth of Craig. And
at what point, Craig, does it get easier?
Well, easier when the allergy, that's in your body for this kind of thing. I said in the meeting last week, I know people have stories about their relatives were this or that, but I was an adopted kid, and my addiction, my need to fix myself happened right when I was born. I should have been taken from my mother's uterus to an AA meeting. That's what I think. You get, by stopping what's killing you, you've stopped the operation of the allergy that you have because you're no longer putting in the thing that you're allergic to, but it's also coupled to an obsession of the mind. And so, I'm left with that, the obsession of the mind. So when these problems come up, it brings up old reactions, to run or to figure out a way of shining people on and so forth. But I don't do it anymore.
Is one of the ways by going to a meeting?
Yeah. I still go to meetings. I go to mostly Zoom meetings now, which I call 7-Eleven AA because it's convenient. But I still do. And once in a while I speak at meetings. I never ask to speak, but whenever I'm asked to speak to a big crowd or a group or something, I never say no. I would if I had a broken leg or a hip or something, I wouldn't go. But other than that, if I go. And because part of recovery has to do with, are you willing to help others? Are you available for the sick and suffering alcoholics that just come in, that venture into the meetings? Can you take them by the hand and welcome them? And so I wanted to do all that. I wanted to do all that, and I did. And it fed me a thing called self-compassion. I felt compassionate for myself that I had this alcohol and drug addiction, which are classified as diseases. I never knew that. So I had this disease. And so I gave myself a little forgiveness because I didn't really have the power to control it or to stop it once I was totally addicted. So they win not by willpower. A lot of people say, "Are you sober 46 years?" Oh my God, what willpower? I said, no willpower, none, not an iota. It's all about being powerless. It's about giving up. It's about white flags. It's like sitting down at a card table, a poker table, and when your ass hits the chair that you're going to lose. That's what it's like. And so you have to give up. And so that's what I did. I gave up to the fact that I cannot control. In fact, once I've had one or two lines of Coke or a martini, one martini, it was the first drink that got me rolling. And that's why I can't touch anything today.
It's like an allergy. It's like an allergy.
Yeah, it's an allergy. It really is. That's what the American Medical Association said. It's a disease. It's classified as a disease. I never knew that, but I found out about 20 years after I started. So I started to go inside and go to those deep, dark places where the secrets were and the things that I did that were wrong. And you have to make amends to people that you fucked over or you hurt in some ways, which is another part of that's very, very difficult. But it's a cleansing of the soul, I think. I would say that. And so I'm there, not as a perfect student or anything, but everything that I am today comes from what I've learned in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. I know that sounds like a commercial, but it's really not. It is my experience, and I'm totally convinced of that because I simply could not do it myself. I tried so many times. So I'm very grateful there. And I've been given a new life, a different life, I would say a different design for life. So I live a different way. And when I look at myself in the mirror, it's never with shame. I mean, it might be a troubled look because of something I'm facing, but that man in the mirror is a true blue guy. Absolutely. And I'm not trying to be braggadocious. So some woman said, well, what's your goal? I said, I'd like to be the same person outside my apartment as I am inside my apartment. She said, have you come very far? I said, oh, yeah, I've come very far. My relationships are all clear, clean, and pretty straightforward. I feel that way. I don't want to sound perfect, and I'm not. But I've grown as a person, and I look at everything. My perceptions of life and the people in it and myself have changed drastically as a result of getting clean and sober. No question.
Yeah, it sounds like it. Well, we're
Yeah,
going
I said, if I don't have any tattoos on my body, but if I did get a tattoo, I'd get that stencil type that they use in prisons. And I put it on my chest between my tits, and it would say, property of AA, like those athletic sweatshirts,
Listen, my darling, we're going to have to stop because our time is up. But I must say, Craig,
I didn't talk about love very much because I got a lot
be quiet for a second. You are one of the most amazing people. You've done it all. You have fucking done it all.
I don't say all, but I've done everything that I desire.
The only one thing you haven't done is you haven't been able to stay in a long-term relationship with a woman. That's the one thing you haven't done, Craig.
I have this one. I have Ann Martin in my life today. We're very, very close, but friends. We're not coupled anymore. We don't do the bedroom boogie.
Anyhow, I want to thank you so much for the
Oh, you're
last
welcome.
2 episodes. You are a gem.
Well, I think you're kind of a gemstone yourself, kiddo.
So let's say goodbye.
Yeah, take care of yourself, my sweet. I send you a big hug.
God bless.